This morning, federal marshals arrived at Mar-a-Lago, not for a search, not for an arrest, for a seizure, a court-ordered seizure to enforce unpaid legal judgments. Before we go any further, I want you to do something for me. If you care about accountability, if you care about how the legal system actually works, hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to understand what's happening. Leave a comment with your thoughts because this conversation matters and you're watching where we break down the law without the spin, without the noise, just evidence. I have prosecuted cases for 3 decades, war crimes, organized crime, corrupt officials at the highest levels. I have seen debt collection enforcement in federal court more times than I can count, but I have never seen it at this scale, never involving assets of this value, never for someone who spent years claiming immunity from everything. Let me be clear about something before we go further, because I know some of you are thinking this sounds too dramatic, like it cannot be real. I understand that skepticism, I get it. But this is real. This is standard legal process. It just happens to involve a property worth hundreds of millions of dollars and an individual who spent years refusing to comply with court orders. I am going to walk you through exactly what happened, what the law says, why this moment matters, not speculation, evidence. I will be tracking this case as it develops. Every legal step, every filing, no spin. If you want the evidence without the noise, you are in the right place. Now, here is what makes this different from any property seizure I have witnessed in 30 years of federal prosecution. The scale, yes, but more importantly, the pattern. This is not the first judgment. It is not even the second. It is the third major civil judgment with the same response every single time: delay, deny. Do not pay. That pattern tells me something, and I'm going to show you exactly what it tells me. Let me give you the timeline because the details matter here. First judgment, $83 million, defamation case, jury verdict, January 2024. The plaintiff's attorney sent a demand letter, payment due within 30 days. No payment came. Second judgment, $355 million plus interest. Fraud case, judge's ruling, February 2024. Again, payment demand. Again, no payment. Instead, appeals. Now, let me pause here because this is important. Appeals are legal. Everyone has the right to appeal. But appeals do not eliminate the debt. They just delay enforcement. Third judgment, $91 million, another defamation case, different plaintiff, same exact pattern, March 2024. By this point, we are looking at over $500 million in court-ordered judgments, not allegations, not pending lawsuits, judgments. That means courts looked at evidence, juries heard testimony, legal determinations were made. These are final rulings, binding orders. And here is where standard legal process kicks in. You have heard the term writ of execution before. Maybe you have seen it on legal shows. Maybe you have heard it in passing. Here is what it actually means in plain English. When someone refuses to pay a court judgment, the winning party can ask the court to seize assets, houses, cars, bank accounts, property. That is not politics. That is not persecution. That is standard debt collection law. It is the same process a bank uses if you default on a mortgage. The same process a business uses if you do not pay an invoice after losing in court. The law does not distinguish between regular citizens and wealthy individuals. The process is identical. The mechanism is the same whether you owe $10,000 or $500 million. So the attorneys for the plaintiffs filed for writs of execution. They identified assets. Mar-a-Lago came up on that list because it is registered as a commercial property, a club, not a personal residence. That matters legally. Personal residences have certain protections under the law, homestead exemptions, creditor shields. Commercial properties do not. If you operate a business out of a property, if you charge membership fees, if you generate revenue from it, it is a business asset. Business assets are fair game for judgment enforcement. The court granted the writs. Federal marshals were authorized to enforce them. That is what happened this morning. That is the process. Now, I want to explain how this escalation works step by step because the media is not doing it clearly, and you deserve to understand your own legal system. Here is the escalation. Step one, judgment entered. A court or jury determines someone owes money. That judgment becomes a matter of public record. Step two, demand for payment. The winning party formally demands the money, usually gives 30 to 60 days to comply. Step three, if no payment comes, they file for a writ of execution. That is a court order authorizing seizure of assets to satisfy the debt. Step four, marshals or sheriffs enforce the writ. They inventory assets, they arrange for professional valuation, They begin the process of liquidation if necessary. If you won a lawsuit against someone and they refused to pay, you would have this exact same right. You could go to court, get a writ, have law enforcement seize their assets to cover what they owe you. The law does not care about your status. It does not care about your public profile. It cares about debt and assets. It cares about enforcement. That is how the system is designed to work. Now, I know some of you are asking the obvious question. Can they really seize Mar-a-Lago? Yes, here is why. It is classified as a commercial property under Florida law. It operates as a private club with paying members, membership fees, event hosting, revenue generation. That means it is a business asset, not a protected personal residence. Business assets are fair game for judgment enforcement. There are no special exemptions, no protections. The property will be appraised. Professional appraisers will assess market value, current condition, comparable sales in the area. They will file that valuation with the court. If the debtor still does not pay after the valuation, the property can be sold at auction, public auction, highest bidder. The proceeds go to satisfy the judgment. Any excess goes back to the debtor. That is standard process. It happens thousands of times a year across the country in civil enforcement cases. The only difference here is the property value and the person involved, but the legal authority is identical. The constitutional framework is the same. The enforcement mechanism is the same. That is the legal mechanism at work. Now, let me show you what this means beyond one property, beyond one individual, beyond one moment in time. Here is where I need you to see the pattern, because this is bigger than one debt or one building. This is about the integrity of the entire civil justice system. Here is where the pattern becomes undeniable. This is the third major judgment. First case, defamation, $83 million. Second case, fraud, $355 million. Third case, defamation, $91 million. Three separate cases, three separate courts. Three juries or judges looked at evidence and ruled against the defendant, and three times the same response: delay, deny, do not pay. That is not coincidence. That is a pattern of behavior. I have prosecuted cases for 30 years. I have seen defendants try every tactic to avoid accountability: procedural delays, frivolous motions, appeals on technicalities. I have seen it all. What I have not seen is this scale of resistance to basic civil enforcement. Not in organized crime cases, not in fraud cases, not in corruption cases. And here is why that matters to everyone. Not just the people involved in these specific cases, not just the plaintiffs, everyone who depends on the civil justice system. Civil courts are how we resolve disputes without violence, contract disagreements, business fraud, defamation, personal injury. When someone wrongs you and will not make it right voluntarily, you go to court. You present your evidence. A jury or judge decides based on the facts. If you win, you get a judgment. But that judgment means absolutely nothing if it cannot be enforced. Think about that for a moment. If someone with resources can simply refuse to pay court judgments indefinitely, what does that mean for everyone else who uses civil courts? It means the system only works for people without the money to delay and appeal endlessly. It means justice becomes a commodity you can buy your way out of. It means regular citizens get one system and wealthy defendants get another. Let me know in the comments. Does this pattern of ignoring judgments change how you see civil enforcement? I am curious what you are seeing here, because I want to know if you are connecting these dots. Here is what I see. Those juries in those cases were regular citizens. 23 people total across three cases. They looked at evidence, they listened to testimony, they deliberated, they reached verdicts. If those verdicts can be ignored, if judgments can be treated as optional suggestions rather than binding orders, then the entire civil justice system loses credibility. This is where we find out if the system works when it is tested, not just in criminal court where the stakes are liberty and imprisonment, in civil court too, where the stakes are accountability and compensation. When powerful people are held to the same standards as everyone else, when the rules apply equally. This is the test. Maybe you have never been involved in a lawsuit. Maybe you never will be. That is fortunate. But here is why this matters to you directly, even if you never set foot in a courtroom. Civil courts are the non-criminal accountability system. Someone breaches a contract with your small business. Someone defrauds you in a deal. Someone defames you and destroys your reputation. You cannot put them in prison for that. Criminal law does not cover it, but you can sue them in civil court. And if you win, if the evidence supports you, if the jury agrees with you, you get a judgment. That judgment is supposed to mean something. It is supposed to give you recourse. It is supposed to make you whole financially. But if judgment enforcement becomes optional for the wealthy and well connected, then that entire system collapses for regular people. If your small business wins a judgment against a larger company that refuses to pay, you need the Marshall system to work. You need writs of execution to have teeth. You need courts to back up their own orders with the force of law. If you are defrauded and you win in court, you need asset seizure to mean something real. Otherwise, justice is just a word on paper with no real world consequence. When enforcement becomes optional for people with resources to delay and appeal endlessly, the system fails for everyone else. That is not an exaggeration. That is not political rhetoric. That is the logical outcome. That is what is at stake here. Not just one property or one individual, not just Mar-a-Lago. The principle that court judgments matter, that civil accountability exists, that the system works equally whether you are rich or poor, powerful or ordinary. That is what is being tested right now in real time. So that is what is at stake for you personally. Now, let me tell you what happens next and what you should be watching for. Here is what happens next in this process. The Marshals will conduct a full property valuation. They will bring in certified appraisers, professionals who assess real estate value for a living. They will assess the market value of Mar-a-Lago, land value, building value, comparable properties, current market conditions, all of it. They will file that valuation with the court as part of the official record. The debtor has options at that point, several paths forward. Option one, pay the judgment, write a check, transfer funds, satisfy the debt in full. If that happens, enforcement stops immediately. The writ is satisfied, the case is closed. Option two, negotiate a settlement, maybe pay a portion now. Work out a payment plan for the rest. Agree to terms that satisfy the plaintiffs. That happens in civil cases all the time. Courts encourage settlement. Option three, continue appealing while the property sits in legal limbo. File more motions. Request stays of enforcement. Argue procedural issues. But here's the thing about that option. Appeals take time, months, sometimes years, but they do not stop enforcement indefinitely. Courts can allow seizure to proceed even while appeals are pending, especially when there is a pattern of delay, especially when judgments keep piling up. If no resolution comes through any of those options, the property goes to auction. That is months away, not days or weeks. But it is the legal endpoint if the debt remains unpaid. The proceeds from the auction satisfy the judgment. Pay the plaintiffs what they are owed under court order. Any excess returns to the debtor. That is standard process. That is how it works in every jurisdiction. No one is above the law. Not in criminal court, not in civil court, not anyone. But that only stays true if citizens hold the system accountable. The system works when people pay attention, when they understand what is happening, when they demand equal enforcement. If you want to watch this process unfold step by step, evidence by evidence, subscribe to this channel. Let me know in the comments. Do you think this gets resolved before it reaches auction? I read every single comment. Now, let me address something I know some of you are thinking. Some of you are wondering if this is political, if this is coordinated, if this is persecution disguised as legal process. I understand that question. Let me address it directly. These are civil cases, not criminal prosecutions. Civil cases are brought by private parties, not the government. In the defamation cases, private individuals sued. They presented evidence. Juries heard both sides. Defense attorneys had every opportunity to present their case. In the fraud case, the state brought the action, but it was a civil fraud case, not criminal. The difference matters. Civil cases have a lower burden of proof, preponderance of the evidence, not beyond reasonable doubt. But the process is still adversarial. Both sides present evidence. A judge evaluates it. In every single one of these cases, the defense had full due process rights: the right to counsel, the right to present evidence, the right to cross-examine witnesses, the right to appeal. All of those rights were exercised, and in every case, the courts ruled against the defendant. That is not politics. That is the outcome of legal process. Now, you can disagree with the verdicts. You can think the jury's got it wrong. You can think the damages are excessive. That is your right. But disagreeing with the outcome does not make the process illegitimate. It does not make enforcement persecution. The law is clear. The process is underway. The marshals are doing their job. They are enforcing court orders. That is what they are supposed to do. Let me show you something else that matters here: the legal precedent. Because this is not new. This is not some novel legal theory. Asset seizure to satisfy civil judgments has been part of American law since the founding. It is based on English common law that goes back centuries. The Constitution protects due process, it protects property rights, but it does not protect property from legal seizure after due process has been followed. If a court enters a judgment against you, if you have had your day in court, if you have had the opportunity to defend yourself, your property can be seized to satisfy that judgment. That is settled law. It has been challenged. It has been appealed to the Supreme Court multiple times over decades. The principle stands. The law is clear. So when you see marshals enforcing a writ of execution, they are not inventing new law. They are applying centuries old legal principles, the same principles that allow a bank to foreclose on your house if you default on your mortgage, the same principles that allow a creditor to garnish your wages if you do not pay a debt, the same principles that allow a business to seize assets if you breach a contract. The scale is different here. The dollar amounts are massive, but the legal framework is identical. That is important to understand. Now, let me talk about what this means for accountability more broadly, because I think there is a bigger lesson here. For 30 years, I have prosecuted cases where powerful people tried to avoid accountability. I have seen every trick in the book: delay tactics, jurisdiction challenges, procedural motions, witness intimidation, document destruction. I have seen it all. And here is what I have learned. The only thing that makes accountability real is enforcement. You can have the best laws on the books, the most detailed regulations, the clearest rules, but if those rules are not enforced, they are meaningless. If people can ignore them without consequence, they are not laws, they are suggestions. That is why this moment matters, because enforcement is happening. The system is working the way it is supposed to work, slowly, methodically, but working. 3 judgments, 3 courts, 3 separate legal processes. It's all reached the same conclusion. Debt is owed, payment is required, and now enforcement is underway. That sends a message, not a political message, a legal message. The message is simple. Court orders matter. Judgments have consequences. The civil justice system has teeth. That message matters for everyone. If you are a small business owner, you need to know that if someone breaches a contract with you, the courts will back you up. If you are defrauded, you need to know that you can get justice. If you are defamed, you need to know that you have recourse. The system only works if enforcement is real, if it applies to everyone, if wealth and power do not buy you immunity. That is what we are seeing tested right now. So what does this tell us about the state of the legal system? What does it tell us about accountability? Here is my take after 3 decades in federal prosecution. The system is slow, painfully slow. Civil cases take years. Appeals take years. Enforcement takes months or years. That is frustrating. I get it. But slow is different from broken. These cases moved through the system. Evidence was presented. Due process was followed. Judgments were entered. Now enforcement is happening. That is the system working. Not perfectly, not quickly, but working. The question is whether it will continue to work, whether enforcement will be completed, whether the judgments will be satisfied. We do not know the answer yet. That is what we are watching. That is why you are here. Let me tell you what I am watching for in the coming weeks. First, the property valuation. When the appraisers file their report, we will see an official market value for Mar-a-Lago. That number matters. It determines how much of the debt can be satisfied through this one asset. It sets the baseline for any negotiation. Second, any motions to stop enforcement. I expect the defense to file emergency motions, requests for stays, appeals of the writ itself. That is standard. Watch how the courts respond. Do they grant stays or do they let enforcement proceed? Third, settlement discussions. In cases like this, settlement often happens right before enforcement becomes irreversible, right before the auction. That is when the pressure is greatest. Watch for any indication that negotiations are happening. Fourth, public statements. What is being said about this process? Is it being framed as legitimate enforcement or political persecution? How that narrative develops matters for public understanding. And fifth, other creditors. Once one creditor successfully seizes assets, other creditors often follow. If you are owed money by someone who is not paying, you watch what works for other creditors. You file your own writs. That could create a cascade effect. Those are the 5 things I am watching. That is what you should be watching too, because those indicators will tell us whether this enforcement is isolated or part of a broader pattern, whether the system is working across the board or just in this one case. Now, let me address a question some of you are asking. What about criminal cases? Is this connected to any criminal investigations? Here's what I can tell you. These are civil cases, separate from any criminal process. Civil and criminal are parallel systems. They can run simultaneously. They often do. A person can face civil liability and criminal prosecution for the same conduct, different standards, different burdens of proof, different outcomes. The civil judgments we are discussing are final. They are being enforced. Any criminal investigations are separate. They follow their own timeline, their own evidentiary standards. I am not going to speculate about criminal cases that may or may not exist. That is not what this channel does. I deal with evidence, with facts, with legal process that is public and documented. What I can tell you is that these civil judgments are real. The enforcement is real, and the legal process is moving forward. That is what we know. That is what we can verify. Everything else is speculation, and I do not traffic in that. Let me take a step back and talk about what this moment represents. 30 years ago, when I started as a prosecutor, I believed in the legal system. I believed that evidence mattered, that process mattered, that accountability was possible. I still believe that, but I've also seen the limits of the system. I have seen powerful people delay justice for years. I have seen wealth buy the best legal teams who file motion after motion after motion. I have seen cases drag on so long that witnesses die, memories fade, evidence disappears. I have seen the system fail, but I have also seen it work. I have seen juries of ordinary citizens listen to complex evidence and reach the right verdict. I have seen judges rule against powerful defendants. I have seen enforcement happen even when it seemed impossible. This moment is one of those times when the system is being tested, when we find out if it works for everyone or just for some people. The answer is not predetermined. It depends on enforcement. It depends on whether courts back up their own orders. It depends on whether marshals can do their jobs without interference. It depends on whether the rule of law is real or just rhetoric. I think it is real. I think enforcement will happen. But I am watching carefully because history teaches us that nothing is guaranteed. Power pushes back. Wealth buys delay. Influence creates obstacles. The system only works when citizens demand that it works, when people pay attention, when they understand what is happening, when they hold institutions accountable. That is why I am making this video. That is why I am breaking this down step by step, because you deserve to understand your own legal system. You deserve to see how it works, and you deserve to hold it accountable. So let me summarize where we are. 3 civil judgments totaling over $500 million, 3 separate cases, 3 separate courts, all reach the same conclusion: debt is owed, payment has not been made, writs of execution have been filed and granted. Federal marshals have arrived at Mar-a-Lago to enforce those writs. A property valuation is underway. The debtor has options: pay, settle, appeal, or let the process continue to auction. That is where we are legally. Now, here is where we are as a society. We are finding out if civil judgments matter, if court orders can be ignored indefinitely, if wealth and power create immunity from legal accountability. The answer to those questions will shape the legal system for everyone, not just for the people involved in these cases, for every person who might need to use civil courts in the future, for every small business that might need to enforce a contract, for every individual who might need to sue for damages. The stakes are bigger than one property, bigger than one individual. This is about whether the rule of law is real. I have spent 30 years believing it is. I am about to find out if I am right. You are too. That is why this matters. That is why you should be paying attention. That is why I am going to keep tracking this case every step of the way. Every filing, every motion, every court decision. No spin, no politics, just evidence and legal analysis. If that is what you are looking for, this is the channel for you. Now, before we wrap up, I want to hear from you. What do you think happens next? Does this get resolved before auction? Does the debtor pay the judgments? Does settlement happen? Or does this go all the way to a public auction of one of the most famous properties in America? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. I want to know what you are thinking, what you are seeing, what questions you have. This is a conversation, not a lecture. Your perspective matters. And if you found this analysis valuable, if you learned something, if you want to see more breakdowns like this, do me a favor. Share this video. Send it to someone who needs to understand what is actually happening. Send it to someone who is confused by the headlines. Send it to someone who wants facts instead of spin, because that is what we do here at We Cut Through the Noise. We explain the law. We follow the evidence, no matter where it leads, no matter who it involves. The law does not care about politics. It does not care about popularity. It cares about evidence, process, and enforcement. That is what I care about too. That is what you will get on this channel. every single time. So subscribe if you have not already. Hit that notification bell so you do not miss the next update, because this case is going to develop. There will be new filings, new motions, new developments, and I will be here to break down every single one. Like this video if you found it helpful. Leave a comment with your thoughts on where this goes next, and share it with someone who needs to see this. The more people who understand how the legal system actually works, the stronger that system becomes. Accountability requires attention. Justice requires witnesses. The rule of law requires citizens who understand it and demand it. That is you. That is why you are here. So thank you for watching. Thank you for paying attention. Thank you for caring about evidence and process and truth. And I will see you in the next update, because the law is clear. The process is underway. And the question of whether our legal system works for everyone, not just some people, remains unanswered.